Greetings, book lovers everywhere. I'm E-Train. Welcome to E-Train Talks. I'm a 12-year-old literacy and kindness advocate, podcast host, and booktuber. And here on E-Train Talks, I love talking about diverse and inspiring books. And these two stories right here by my guest today are truly the definition of amazing, inspirational, and heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. Today, I just want to take a moment to say thank you to my guest, who was born in a small town in northern Mexico and moved to San Antonio as a child. She studied physics and worked as an engineer before pursuing her love of storytelling. She's so passionate about connecting children to their past, their communities, different cultures, and I am so thrilled to be welcoming, drumroll please, Alda P. Dobbs, the author of Barefoot Dreams of Petra and the Other Side of the River. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, E-Train. It's truly an honor. I'm very humbled to be here by your words, too. And it's just so exciting. I've been looking forward to this since I think it was summer last year that I reached out to you. And I remember I heard about you. And as quick as I could, I went to my computer and, it's like, hey, can you consider me? So it's an honor. Thank you so much.
Well, it's an honor for me as well, because from the moment I first saw Barefoot Dreams of Petra, from the moment I first read the first page, I was hooked, and I could not wait for the interview. And then when I found out you had a sequel, I knew I had to jump on that and read The Other Side of the River as well. Oh. And now into the questions.
Sure.
So my first question for you is, both Barefoot Dreams of Petra and The Other Side of the River are heartwarming as well as heart-wrenching stories of Petra's determination to survive and travel to a better life. I was just so moved by your writing, and I read that Petra's stories are actually based on the real-life journey of your great-grandmother during the time of the Mexican Revolution. Can you share what inspired you to write about your great-grandmother's expedition, I guess you could say?
Sure. Yes. Yeah, no, I grew up listening to family stories ever since I was 3 or 4 years old, since I have, that I remember stuff like that. I remember hearing stories from my great-grandmother, from my grandmother, and my mom would tell all these stories. And of course, it would add all that emotion into it. So I was really inspired by those stories. And one of them that really interested me was of my great-grandmother when she was escaping fleeing the Mexican Revolution, all the horrors of that war. And she was trying to reach north for safety. And I heard about the turmoil that was at the border and her trying to cross and the near-death situation that she had there at the bridge. And this story, I thought, you know what, I'm going to research it, see if it was really true. And I checked out a bunch of books on the Mexican Revolution, about 40 books in English and Spanish, some of them really, really thick books. And it took me 2 years to read them all. And after those 2 years, there was nothing in there that mentioned that turmoil at the bridge. And my great-grandmother had said it was hundreds of people around her. So I said, how could a powerful story not be in a book like this? And I was about to quit after 2 years. So I was really, really tired of, not finding anything about it. But a librarian saved the day. And that librarian said, there's these resources you could try out. And one of them was having access to old newspapers in Texas. Really old, from the 1800s. So I picked a date, which was the start of the Mexican Revolution, and began reading newspapers starting with that date. And eventually, after 7 months, I found an article that depicted that story, that told that story that my great-grandmother had always told. And just to see it there in print, it had happened. It was real. Everything she had described was in there. The only thing she was off about was that she said it was hundreds of people around her, and it was actually thousands. There was 7,000 people that crossed a bridge that day. So I said, you know what, a powerful story like this, I have to tell the world about it. And my aim is to hopefully inspire other people to seek their own stories and to find out, what happened, and then to share them with the rest of the world. So that was my inspiration.
You were originally an engineer, as I previously said. Mm-hmm. So what really kind of clicked, I guess you could say? Was it like an aha moment when you were like, I want to pursue storytelling, I want to be a middle grade author and share my great-grandmother's story?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I was born in Mexico and I moved to the United States. And even though I moved here at a very young age, everything around me was in Spanish. My whole neighborhood spoke in Spanish. My mom, my family, the little lady at the corner store, everything was in Spanish. English wasn't introduced to me until I started kindergarten. And the teacher I had in kindergarten wasn't the most patient. He got really frustrated with me and another immigrant boy because we couldn't learn English fast enough. So I was terrorized, because he would burst, into anger when we couldn't learn it fast enough. So, and I had him for 3 years. I had him for kinder, second, and fourth grade. And by, kinder and second grade, I was terrorized by English and by him. Fourth grade, I knew English a little bit better, but I just couldn't stand English anymore. I developed that whole terror and fear I had towards English became kind of like a feeling of defiance. I just rebelled against English, and I didn't want to read. I didn't want to write books or anything that dealt with English. I don't want to touch it. and it was kind of a trauma. But stories, I love stories. I love listening to family stories. I love, being told stories by anybody, and I would share those stories and imagine a lot of things. And I never made that connection between books and stories. And fast forward to when I was in high school, I was riding a public bus because I used to work at a mall. And right after the mall shut down and or closed for the day, I finished work, went to the bus, put my backpack down. And right before I put my backpack down, somebody had left had forgotten a copy of a book there. And I picked it up wondering what it was. And it was Catcher in the Rye, which is a book a little for older kids. But I said, you know what? I finished my homework. Let me read this book. So I started reading the book. And as I read it, I was blown away. I just said, oh my goodness, this is wonderful. I can put the book down. I read it the whole night. I went home, stayed up the whole night, read it. And the next morning I had to get ready for school, and I shut it. And I said, this is magic. I want to do this magic one day. This is wonderful because the character's nothing like me. It's completely opposite, yet I feel everything that character feels. So I said, okay, I want to be a writer. That idea came to me. But my grades in English were terrible. And then when I got to college, we took entrance exams. I did well in math and science, but English, I did horrible. So I told myself, you know what? This is the universe telling me not to become a writer, to put that dream away. So I did that. I put the dream away. I pursued physics and engineering. But those stories, they kept bubbling inside me. They wanted to come out. And it wasn't until my 30s that my husband said, hey, why don't you start writing? You've always wanted to be a writer. And he's the one that really pushed me. And I'm glad, because that's, and it was this fear of English, that I always had growing up. But like I tell young readers and people who aspire to write, in order to be a writer, you don't have to write perfect English or speak it perfectly. All you have to do is be a good storyteller. You just have to be a good storyteller, and that's what's most important. The rest, it can come with practice. You have people that help you revise and edit the work. So there's that thing, just the storytelling. That's what's important.
My next question is, what was the writing process like? I ask a lot of authors, but this is kind of more of I guess you could say it's autobiographical, but also kind of fictional. It has a lot of elements to it. So what was the writing process like for creating The Barefoot Dreams of Petra, and then also The Other Side of the River?
It was interesting because, remember, my background's in science and engineering. And even though I'd always been a writer, I'd always written reports for engineering, proposals. You're always pitching a story.
Yeah.
So I kept telling myself, look, you just have to do it a little different, more creative writing. And so I started reading. I read a ton of books that I kind of regretted not having started earlier. And I envy kids that I see your age that have all these books, like my daughter. Oh my goodness, she reads so many books a year. And I feel like I'm playing catch up constantly. But it's good, so my process was reading a lot of books and learning just the craft, of how sentences were formed, how there's also a technique, just like in engineering. If you want to construct something, the same thing. In order to construct a story, there's elements that you got to put together and combine them in such a way for it to work. And a sentence as well. There's different styles of sentences for writers, but, you got to learn how it plays with that scene and that theme and stuff like that. So that I had to learn that. And also the thick skin, right? You have to have a thick skin because you will get a lot of rejections. And it's something you got to just, realize that the people are critiquing your work. They're not critiquing you. Don't take it personal. It's just your work, and you can improve your work. So you got to keep that in mind. And the perseverance, you just got to keep at it. And that's one thing I always like, that's something that helped me a lot through my, not only just in writing, but in every career when I was in physics and engineering, is that mentors help a ton. And I always tell people, no matter what career field you choose, find that mentor. Every time you get to a new place of work or school, look at someone who's been there 5 years longer than you, and ask yourself, who do I want to be in 5 years from now or 10 years from now? And go to that person and say, hey, how did you get here? What did you do? And try, because a lot of people are happy to take you under their wing and show you the ways. So that helped me a lot. I had wonderful mentors to help me write these books. And it did take some time because I was learning how to write, learning how to do the research. A lot of stuff I didn't realize that, for one, that librarians are there to help you. As an engineer, I would go into the library, grab books, go into my dorm room and just do the work. And I didn't realize that you could speak to the librarian. They'll show you the many, many resources out there that are helpful, that will make your job easier. And I didn't know that, until somebody told me, go to the library, make an appointment. And I looked at them and said, are you sure you could do this? And they said, yeah, that's what libraries are there for. And I said, oh, I thought they were just there to tell you to, be quiet or, or where the books are at. But no, they are very helpful. And this book wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for librarians. Librarians, save the day. So that was my writing process in terms of research. And then, I had to find ways to learn how to write. And it was by reading a lot of books.
My next question for you is more about, so we've been talking about storytelling, but I also wanted to dive into like the nonfiction kind of aspects. So this story is all, well, at least for Barefoot Jeans and Petroluna, it's set in Mexico during the Mexican Revolution, and it was a big battle between the Federales and the Revolucionarios. So can you tell us how this big conflict really started and what came of it?
Yes, it's something that I grew up, I would always hear the stories, but I never got, what exactly happened, why did the revolution come about? And I kind of would put the pieces together, but they weren't too clear. And it wasn't until I started to research with this book. And it is a very complicated war. There's a lot of, for any grown-up out there listening to me, I compare this to Game of Thrones, because there's a lot of people, trying to overcome and take control and take power. Or I also compare to Star Wars a lot, where you have the evil empire, the rebels. And it's a universal story, right? You have the oppressed people fighting against the oppressor. So that's what happened in Mexico, that they had these haciendas. They were these estates, and there were thousands and thousands of acres, and it was owned by one family. And that family was, really, really wealthy, and they would control, the peasants living there. And they would take away the lands because of the government. The government, it's like I said, it's very complicated. I try to explain it better in the book, and I think I do better than I do here. Trying to explain it in this conversation, but yeah, there was a big group of oppressed people, the poor people, the peasants, and until there was an uprising, they said, you know what, we're going to fight our oppressor. And they started wanting to take their lands back and have opportunities for their kids, because majority of kids had to work during this time. Only 20% of the population could read and write. So that means 80% was illiterate. So it was easy to take advantage of that population that was illiterate, because not only were they economically disadvantaged, they were poor, but they were illiterate as well. And the haciendas, like I said, some haciendas were really, really big, these estates. And like the Terrazas family, their hacienda was the size of Connecticut and Rhode Island put together. So if you can imagine, millions of acres, and all that belonged to one family. And a lot of this land was being taken away from the poor. So of course you're going to have that uprising. And the hacendados, the haciendas, were so common in Mexico that if you look back at the statistics, land ownership in Mexico during that time was only 1%. So only 1% of Mexicans own land. So that means 99% do not own land. So that's a huge disparity right there. I mean, just catastrophic disparity, that this is what happens. You have an uprising. And fortunately, it was very, very brutal. A lot of people, perished during this, but a lot of people emigrated. They went north, like my great-grandmother. And at the end of the revolution, a lot of people went back to Mexico, like my great-grandmother. She went back, but a lot of people remained in the United States. At the end of the revolution, 2 million people remained in the United States, 2 million Mexicans, and that changed the country forever, which is not mentioned, a lot in books and stuff like that. So it's important to know that, that impact. And also, that's a reason why I did the other side of the river, because in my great grandmother's story, she went back to Mexico, but I always wondered what her life would have been like had she remained in the United States. Because when she went back, she said it was a disaster. Everything was burned to the ground, villages were completely destroyed, and it was almost impossible to start. So I said, you know what, I'm going to put Petra Luna in San Antonio and see how she fares, because a lot of people were competing for resources, for works, for housing, and that's why I wanted to put Petra Luna there.
Well, you spoke about how 80% of Mexicans were illiterate, and that really got me thinking. Like, I mean, I know I've only had like a minute to think, and I've also been listening to this story, but it's just wow. And the fact that 99% of Mexicans didn't own land. Like, I just want to take a second to really understand the complexity of that. That's just
Yeah,
astonishing,
it
to
is,
say the
right?
least. And
Exactly. And that's what I tell children. If you listen to these family stories, you realize that things repeat themselves. They happen again over and over. That crisis at the border that my great grandmother crossed over 100 years ago, you look at that same border now, and guess what? You have the same crisis happening again. The refugee camps that my great grandmother was in, we have refugee camps now. And so many things repeat themselves. Like right now we have COVID. Back then they had smallpox. And when those refugees came across, like my great grandmother with those 7,000 people, a lot of people in the United States and Eagle Pass were scared. They said, no, send them back right now, because what if they have smallpox and we all get sick and die? Well, the U.S. Army, who opened the gates, for those refugees, said, no, we can't send them back because the federales are there. We're sending them to their death. We cannot do that to them. How about we quarantine them, we vaccinate everybody and keep it under control? Luckily for my great grandmother, they didn't send her back. Otherwise, it would have been a different history. But yeah, that just shows you the importance of learning these stories, because you see that it happens again. So when you start seeing those disparities again, right, between education, economic advantages and stuff like that, just be aware that things happen. There's always a consequence for stuff like that.
do you mind sharing if you will be sharing a little bit more in Petra Luna's journey in any future books? Or if you're not, do you have any other writing projects you're working on?
Yeah, so I'm working on book 3 right now, but it's not Petra Luna. It's a completely different setting,
Oh,
character, but it's going to be based more on my own childhood experiences in San Antonio. So yeah, be in the lookout for that. And Petra Luna, I have plenty of Petra Luna in me. So I told people, if you want to, let my publisher know, and maybe we could work something out. So
my next question is, so you talked about how this is about your great-grandmother's journey, but you also did a lot of research in libraries looking through books and newspaper articles. So how much of Petra Luna's journey is really based off of your great-grandmother, and how much did you discover through research, whether it's online or books or from other people who kind of face the same experiences?
yeah, that's a great question, because when you write a book, it's a mesh of a lot of your experiences and stories you've heard. So the core of the story of the little girl crossing the desert to get to the border, yes, that was my great grandmother. She was trying to run away from the Federalists, but a lot of other details within the story happened to my grandmother, her daughter, because she was really poor too. And for instance, there's a scene there where coins are thrown at her by the rich lady who doesn't want to pay her and then throws the coins at her. That happened to my grandmother. And she was delivering wood. They didn't want to pay her, and she asked for the money, and they threw the money at her face, and it fell on the floor. The the lady's husband went and picked up the coins and gave them to and wanted to hand them to my grandmother, but my grandmother wouldn't take them. She did not take them, and she didn't have a little sister like Petra has Amelia, and Amelia kind of convinces her, hey, we need this money, we need to eat. Well, my grandmother didn't have anyone next to her, and she just told the man flat out, straight out, I'm not going to take your money, and I'm not going to deliver wood anymore. And she was 12 years old, and she walked away from that. And that story stayed with me, so I added that to my book. And there was other events too within the book that happened to my grandmother, and also that tension between Abuelita and Petra Luna, that Petra wants to learn how to read and write. Abuelita doesn't see the point to it. I felt that was a little bit of my experience coming here with my mother as an immigrant. I wanted to graduate, I graduated high school and she was really excited because, she only finished the 8th grade. So she said, okay, great, you're set. That's great. And I said, no, but I want to go to college. And she at first didn't understand why the importance of college. And I said, well, more opportunity. So there was that tension between us. Finally, I got my degree. Then I decided to get my master's. And again, she said, why? Why you don't need this. You get a good job. So there's always that different views, different perspectives from different generations. And, she loves me. I know just like Abuelita loves Petra, but, you see the world in different ways. So I wanted to put that in there. So yeah, it's a mixture of stories I heard, experiences I've seen, that I felt, that I put into the story.
Wow. And so the title, Barefoot Dreams of Petraluna, comes from Petraluna's desire to read and write, and how her abuelita calls her dreams barefoot dreams. You can't achieve those, she says, if you have no shoes on your feet and you're working hard every day to receive barely any pay. That rhymes. And I found Petra's story that much more like wow factor, I guess you could say, because I can't imagine the challenges that she faced and also the adversity that she faced, not just from having that physical crossing across Mexico that must have been so draining, but it was also emotionally as well. So I'm just really curious for my next question. Did your great-grandmother also really, really want to read and write, or was that also kind of based off of your experience that you faced, like with your mother or Petra faced with her abuelita?
That's a great question. Yeah, no, my great grandmother, she wanted to read and write, but she was part of that 80%, but when she went back to Mexico, she never had the opportunity to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And then my grandmother is the one with the biggest, boldest spirit. She was a fighter to the end. My great grandmother was too, but my grandmother was just amazing. And at 9, she snuck into a school, while she was working. She saw a school and said, I want to learn how to read and write. So she went there. And her family found out within a day or two that she wasn't working. And they pulled her out and said, you can't do this. You have to work. You can't go to school. And she was pretty upset because she really wanted to go to school. And she figured, you know what, at 9, she told herself, and I can't believe she was 9 years old when she thought this to herself, but she said, you know what, I'm never going to go to school because I have to work, but I want to learn how to read and write, and I'm going to figure it out. So every time she met someone who knew how to read and write, she'd ask them, what does this word say? What does that word say? Little by little, she started breaking down sounds and letters. And by the time she was 12, she figured it out on her own, how to read and write. So to me, that blows my mind that a child could be that determined at 9 and say, yes, I will accomplish this, and then follow through.
My next question for you is one I ask every single person that I've ever interviewed. No pressure or anything. If you could be or meet any literary character, it could be your favorite author or your favorite character in a book, who would you want to meet, or who would you want to maybe be for a day, and why?
Oh my goodness, that's a tough one. That's a tough one because I just have so many favorite books.
Yeah.
But I'd say, oh my Lord, I'd say probably in the Hunger Games. I know that book's a little for older kids, and it's a YA, but the protagonist there.
Katniss Everdeen.
Yeah, Katniss. Is it Everdeen? Yeah, Katniss Everdeen. Just her spirit, how tough she is, and maybe I would have liked to have met her when I was a teenager, when I was her age, because I find a lot of resemblances. I was the oldest of 4 girls. My mom was a single mom, and I had to help my mom pay the bill. So I was always working after school and making sure they were okay, helping them with homeworks and stuff like that. And so when I read that character's book, I'm like, oh my goodness, this reminds me of myself. So I just wanted to hug her and say, it's going to be okay. Hang in there. You're doing good. And that's probably one character I always gravitated to.
Well, the character Katniss Everdeen, I read The Hunger Games in school this year, and I just, wow. Like, it was just mind-blowing. awesomeness, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I love her. Yeah, she's tough. It's one of my favorite characters. And as a matter of fact, her style, Suzanne Collins, the way she writes,
Mm-hmm.
that fast pacing. I studied that book so much while I was writing Barefoot Dreams of Petraluna, just because I wanted to give it that same fast pace,
Yeah.
that tone or feeling to it.
Well, you were fast-paced and slow at the same time. Like, you had the perfect speed, and even if, like, you just kept me interested the entire time, like the Hunger Games really did for me. So you did a great job on that
Oh,
part, and all parts of Barefoot Dreams of Petraluna, and The Other Side of the River.
oh, thank you.
And now my final question for you is, if you were trapped on a deserted island and could only bring one book, what book would it be and why?
Oh my Lord. Oh, that's even tougher.
Don't twist it to be like a notebook actually you can.
I just read recently because I've read a lot of books on writing, and I read this book that's called "A Swim in a Pond, Swim in a Pond in the Rain," or "A Swim in the Rain in the Pond." Oh, I can't. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm forgetting it. Do I have it around here? "A Swim in a Pond in the rain." Yeah. So that one, I love that one because it's he teaches a course in Syracuse, a writing course, and he talks about the Russian Renaissance, pretty much, of the writers that they had: Chekhov, Tchaikovsky. I mean, not Tchaikovsky, but all these great Russian writers. And he goes over those short stories. So he covers, I believe, 5 or 6 short stories, reads them all, and then he analyzes each one. And he used to be an engineer, that the writer, the professor. So I love the way his analysis, the way he sees things. And I was amazed too, because I was like, he analyzes like an engineer. When I found that he was an engineer, I'm like, oh my goodness, he is an engineer. But I love the way he has the stories, and then he breaks down each scene. So, and I have to go back and reread the story and then reread what he says, just because I gain something every time I do that. But yeah, it's just an amazing book. So yeah, I would probably take that book with me because I have a lot of short stories in there that I could read.
Yeah, and you could use like the branches and turn it into paper, or you could like use the sand and write your own short stories.
There you go. Yeah, and they're amazing short stories that each one is so different too, that you get a different sense, and so entertaining. It feels like you're there at that moment of those stories. So yeah, I would get transported to different situations at different times.
Well, everybody, my guest today has been the one and only amazing Alda P. Dobbs. And if you've not yet read Barefoot Dreams of Petraluna and The Other Side of the River, you need to. They are beyond, like, I could use every adjective in the dictionary to describe these. There's just everything in a good way.
No, and that's the thing. Barefoot Dreams of Petraluna, yes, it's inspired by my family, but that story is not unique to my family or to Mexicans. I think it's a universal story that applies to so many Americans that struggle to come to this country. And like in the second book, that I give her a mentor who's an Irish nun, and her backstory is coming from Ireland during the famine. And she tells Petra, look, just because we struggle to come to this country doesn't mean that the struggle's over, the fight's over. No, it continues here. You're still struggling, even though you're in the United States. There are more opportunities. Yeah, there's vast opportunities, but the hard work is still there. So that's something we got to realize about our ancestors, how much they worked to get here, to give us the life that we have now, stuff we take for granted. And so yeah, this story is just, I was trying to aim for that to let people know, yeah, this is a universal story.
It really is a universal story. And everybody, once again, read these books. I guarantee that you'll want to read them over and over again, and you'll learn something new each time. And keep on reading.
Yep.
Keep on writing. And all of you, I will see you in the next one, and read these books.